I used to think I'd already lived through the worst kind of storm a man could face. When my wife Eleanor died 25 years ago, I thought that was it, the final chapter. I sold the airline we built together, a small freight carrier called Hayes Air Cargo, and settled by the river near Vicksburg, Mississippi. The house I designed myself. Quiet, angular, efficient. A place for a man who no longer expected visitors. But grief has a way of circling back when you least expect it. That morning, the rain had started before dawn. I remember the sound, the kind that drums steady and cold against the window panes, the kind that makes the world feel suspended. My assistant, Karen, came in just after 7. She didn't say a word, just placed a black folder on my desk. "From the investigator," she said softly. "He called it urgent." I stared at it for a while before touching it. I'd been waiting for this folder for weeks, though I wasn't sure I still wanted it. Inside were 6 pages and 1 photograph. It wasn't the contents that felt heavy, it was what they meant. I'd hired a private investigator, Grant and Mason Agency in Jackson, to search for any trace of my son Aaron or his family. I hadn't spoken to Aaron since the day he disappeared 30 years ago, taking with him a small fortune from our company accounts, and leaving behind nothing but scandal and a father's humiliation. For decades I convinced myself he was gone for good. Then, 3 weeks ago, I had a dream so vivid it shook me awake. Eleanor was standing in the old hangar, sunlight on her hair, calling a name I couldn't hear. When I woke, the house was silent except for the rain, and in that silence, I knew something was unfinished. I called the investigator the next morning. "Find out if Aaron ever had children," I told him. Now, looking at that black folder, I felt a strange tremor run through me. I opened it. On the first page, typed neatly across the top. Subject: Marcus Caleb Hayes. Male, approximately 6 years old. Mother: Lena Thompson. Status: unhoused. Current location: I-55 overpass, Jackson, Mississippi. I blinked. Unhoused. Such a polite word for what it really meant. Then I saw the photo. It had been taken from a distance, under the gray belly of a concrete bridge. Rain streaked across the lens. A woman crouched beside a makeshift tent, her arms wrapped around a small boy. The boy's face was half hidden in the folds of an old blanket, but even through the blur, I could see the eyes. Gray. Cold gray. Like the reflection of metal under cloudlight. Eleanor used to say that about Aaron. "He has your eyes, Walter, steel and storm." My hand tightened on the photograph. The investigator's note at the bottom read, "Possible familial link to Aaron Hayes. Subject wearing blanket marked with defunct Hayes Air Cargo logo." That detail cut deep. After the company went under, most of our old supplies were auctioned off. Some of those blankets were distributed to shelters years ago. But for one to end up wrapped around a child named Hayes, it couldn't be coincidence. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking under my shoulders. The window beyond the desk looked out over the river. Brown water churned beneath the rain, restless, relentless. Somewhere out there in that same downpour, a child with my blood might be sleeping under a bridge. I didn't move for a long time. When I finally reached for the intercom, my voice came out steadier than I felt. "Karen," I said. "Yes, Mr. Hayes?" "Call the hangar. Have them ready the Gulf Stream. I'm flying out to Jackson tonight. Will anyone be accompanying you?" "No. This one's personal." I ended the call and looked again at the photograph. The boy's small hand clutched the edge of the blanket, my old company's crest, visible just above his knuckles, the faded wings of Hayes Air Cargo. I'd spent decades trying to bury the past, but sometimes the past refuses to stay buried. It climbs out of the mud, drenched and shivering, and forces you to look it in the eye. Outside, thunder rolled over the water. The lights flickered. I slipped the photograph into my jacket pocket. For the first time in years, my heart beat with something that wasn't emptiness. I didn't know what I'd find beneath that bridge, or whether the boy was really my grandson. But I knew one thing. No child carrying my name was going to spend another night in the rain. By dusk, the engines of my plane were warming on the tarmac. The storm stretched black across the Mississippi horizon. As I climbed aboard, lightning forked over the river like veins of fire. I whispered, half to Eleanor, half to myself. If this is the road back to our family, I'll follow it no matter where it leads. The hatch closed. The engines roared. And through the rain, we lifted off toward Jackson, toward the bridge, the boy, and whatever truth was waiting in the storm. The rain hadn't stopped by the time we landed in Jackson. It came down in sheets, blurring the runway lights into streaks of gold and white. My driver, a man named Carson who'd worked for me for 15 years, met me on the tarmac with an umbrella. "Rough weather tonight, Mr. Hayes," he said. "Good," I replied. "Maybe it'll keep the gawkers home." He didn't ask questions. That's why I kept him. We drove north through the dark, the wipers thrashing back and forth against the windshield. The city looked drowned, streetlights smeared into halos, gutters spilling over, cars hissing through standing water. The report had given precise coordinates, a section of highway where the I-55 crossed the old service road on the outskirts of town. By the time we reached it, the rain had turned the dirt shoulder into a swamp. The roar of trucks passing overhead shook the car like thunder. Beneath the bridge, a few flickers of dim orange light glowed, trash fires burning in metal barrels. The smell hit first: wet earth, oil, rot, and something sharp beneath it, the metallic tang of despair. "Stay here," I told Carson. "Sir? It's not—" I said, "Stay here." I grabbed the heavy umbrella, stepped into the downpour, and started toward the flickering lights. The water soaked through my coat in seconds. My shoes sank into mud, the suction pulling with every step. Beneath the bridge, shadows moved. Someone coughed. Someone else muttered, "Don't look at him." Then I saw the tent. It was smaller than I'd imagined from the photograph, a triangle of blue tarp tied with frayed rope. One side had collapsed under the weight of the rain. From inside came a faint, dry sob. I crouched down and lifted the edge of the tarp. "Lena Thompson," I said. A face turned toward me, pale and hollow-eyed. The same woman from the photo. She was clutching a bundle wrapped in that old blanket Hayes Air cargo, stitched along the edge in faded blue thread. "Who are you?" she rasped. Her voice was raw, more from fear than sickness. "My name's Walter Hayes," I said, lowering my voice. "I think that blanket belongs to me." She froze, eyes narrowing. "Then take it," she snapped, drawing the child closer. "But you're not taking him." "I don't want to take anything," I said quietly. "Except you two out of this." The baby or boy, I couldn't tell his age in the dark, stirred in her arms and let out a small cough that tore right through me. "Please," I said, "he needs a doctor." "They already turned us away," she whispered. "The clinic said they're full. They said we should try the shelter." "And the shelter?" "They said the same." The boy coughed again, a deep, wet sound that didn't belong in a child's throat. I knelt lower, keeping my umbrella tilted to cover them. Rain hammered against the nylon like fists. "I have a plane waiting at the airfield," I said. "A doctor on board, warm beds, food. You can be in Vicksburg before morning." She gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "You expect me to believe some stranger with a fancy umbrella just happens to show up under this bridge, in the middle of a storm, offering a private jet?" "I don't expect you to believe anything," I said. "But I'm asking you to make a choice for your son." Lightning flashed, white and violent. For an instant, I saw the boy's face clearly, cheeks sunken, hair plastered to his forehead, skin burning with fever. But what froze me wasn't the sickness. It was the eyes. Steel gray. My family's eyes. "What's his name?" I asked softly. "Caleb," she whispered. "Caleb Thompson." Caleb. I tested the name on my tongue. It carried weight, like something old being spoken again. The boy's small hand gripped the edge of my sleeve. Tiny, hot fingers. He didn't pull away. I looked back at Lena. "1 hour," I said. "We go to the airfield. If you don't trust me after that, I'll pay for a hotel and take you wherever you want to go, but not another night here." Her eyes darted toward the rain outside, toward the shadows shifting behind the barrels of fire. Then she nodded once, quick and sharp, like a decision made too fast to be undone. I helped her gather what little they had: a torn backpack, a baby bottle half full of rainwater, a plastic bag of clothes. She tried to lift the tarp, but it came apart in her hands. "Leave it," I said. "You won't need it again." When we reached the car, Carson's eyes widened at the sight of them. "Sir." "Drive," I said. "Straight to the airfield." The woman sank into the back seat beside me, clutching Caleb so tightly I could hear his shallow breaths. The smell of rain and smoke followed us into the warmth. For a long time, no one spoke. Then, as the car merged onto the wet highway, Lena broke the silence. "You said your name is Hayes." "Yes." Her gaze fixed on me, cautious. "My son's father used that name once," she murmured. "He said it was his middle name, not his real one. He said his family hated him." I felt something cold slide through my chest. "Do you remember his first name?" "Aaron," she said. "Aaron Hayes." The sound of it cracked the air inside the car like another bolt of thunder. I turned my face to the rain-blurred window, heart pounding so hard I could hear it over the storm. "Then," I whispered, almost to myself, "we're family." She said nothing, just held her child tighter. When the car reached the private terminal, my pilot was already waiting, the Gulfstream's lights cutting through the rain like a beacon. The runway shimmered with water. As Carson opened the door, Lena hesitated, her eyes wide at the sight of the jet. "Why are you helping us?" she asked. "Because someone should have helped you a long time ago," I said. The engines whirred to life, a low, steady hum rising into the night. I guided them up the stairs, my coat soaked, my hands trembling not from cold but from something older, fear, hope, and the ghost of Eleanor's voice whispering through the storm. When the door sealed behind us, the world outside vanished into rain and thunder. Inside, for the first time in years, I felt something break open in my chest. It wasn't pity. It was blood calling through time. I looked at the child asleep in his mother's arms and thought, "Aaron, if this is what you left behind, I'll make it right, even if it's the last thing I do." The hum of the engines filled the cabin like a heartbeat. Outside the oval windows, lightning carved the sky into brief, white fractures. Each flash lit the faces opposite me, Lena pale and exhausted, Caleb curled in her arms beneath the faded Hayes air cargo blanket, his small chest rising too quickly. Dr. Mitchell knelt beside them with his medical bag open. He'd served with me years ago as a flight medic, before becoming my company physician. If anyone could steady my nerves in a crisis, it was him. "He's running a high fever," Mitchell said after a moment, pressing a thermometer against the boy's temple. 104. "But lungs are clear enough. Could be viral. Maybe strep." He drew up an injection and looked to Lena. "I'll bring his fever down. He needs rest, fluids, and antibiotics once we land." Lena nodded, her fingers trembling as she brushed Caleb's damp hair. "He hasn't eaten since yesterday. I tried to get him soup at the shelter, but—" She trailed off. I gestured toward the galley. "There's food on board. You'll both eat when he wakes up." Her eyes lifted toward me, suspicious, wary. I could see the years of struggle written in the lines at their corners. She wasn't used to kindness, at least not the kind that didn't demand repayment. When the injection was done, Caleb drifted into a deep, heavy sleep. Mitchell packed up and sat across from me. "You sure about this, Walter? You don't know who they are." "I know enough," I said. He studied me a long moment. "Aaron's boy?" I didn't answer. The storm outside cracked like a rifle shot. Mitchell nodded slightly. "I figured as much." I leaned back, the leather creaking under my shoulders. 30 years I've lived with that name buried. I thought Aaron was dead. Or worse, alive somewhere ruining other lives. I never expected. The words caught in my throat. I looked at the small figure sleeping in his mother's arms, and saw flashes of the past. A young man standing on the tarmac, grinning beside his first solo plane. Eleanor, waving from the hangar door. Pride, glowing in her eyes. "I never expected to see those eyes again," I said quietly. Lena was watching me now. "You knew him," she said. Not a question. "Yes, Aaron Hayes was my son." Her face went still. "Your son. I didn't know about you. Or Caleb." She looked down at the boy, her jaw tightening. "Aaron never told me much. He said his father hated him, that when he made one mistake, you cut him out like a bad engine." I exhaled through my nose, the weight of memory pressing hard. He stole from me, Lena, from the company, from hundreds of families who trusted us with their paychecks. He left us to face the ruin alone. And you think that was easy for him? She asked, her tone sharp but quiet. You think walking away wasn't already punishment enough? I stared at her, caught off guard by the defiance in her voice. You loved him, I said finally. Her gaze softened, just for an instant. Once, until the lies caught up to us. He said he was going to fix everything, to come clean. Then he vanished. I thought he was running again. Until a man showed up at our apartment and told me to forget the name Hayes forever. What man? I don't know. Middle-aged, gray suit, said he worked for the family business. He left an envelope of cash and said if I ever told anyone who Caleb's father was, I'd regret it. Mitchell and I exchanged a look. Charles, I muttered. Who? I hear? My younger brother, I said bitterly. He took over the company after the scandal, claimed he was cleaning up Aaron's mess, but I always wondered how he climbed so fast while the rest of us were drowning. Lena frowned. You think he was involved? I think Charles never saw a fire he couldn't profit from. Mitchell cleared his throat. Let's focus on landing first. I'll notify the hospital in Vicksburg. Kid needs to stay overnight. I nodded, but my thoughts were far from hospitals. Outside, the storm was thinning, the turbulence easing as we broke through the last layer of cloud. Through the clearing, the river shone below like a dark, winding ribbon under moonlight. Lena had fallen asleep upright, her head resting against the window. The boy's small hand peeked out from under the blanket, fingers twitching as if dreaming. I took the photograph from my pocket, the one the investigator had sent. I turned it over. On the back, a faint watermark. JXN Dispatch Photo Unit. Date stamped just 5 days ago. They'd been under that bridge while I sat in my warm house, sipping coffee and pretending the world beyond my windows didn't exist. Shame burned in my throat. Mitchell reached across, resting a hand on my arm. You can't fix 30 years in one night, Walt. I can damn well start trying, I said. The seatbelt sign chimed as the plane began its descent. Through the window, I saw the faint lights of Riverbend Airfield below, glowing like fireflies along the wet tarmac. I leaned forward, watching the shapes of the runway grow larger. Once we land, I told Mitchell, get Caleb stabilized. I'll make some calls in the morning. About what? He asked. About the past, I said. It's time someone stopped pretending it's dead. The wheels touched down with a soft jolt. The engines whirred lower. Rain still fell, but lighter, now just a fine mist against the glass. As we taxied toward the hangar, I looked once more at Lena and Caleb. The boy's fevered breathing had eased. His mother's hand rested protectively on his back, even in sleep. For the first time since Eleanor's funeral, I felt the faintest trace of something I thought I'd buried forever: hope. And as the plane rolled to a stop under the hangar lights, I whispered to the dark cabin, welcome home, kid. You have no idea what storm you've just ended. We reached my estate in Riverbend close to midnight. The drive from the airfield was quiet, except for the sound of rain tapping on the car roof and the occasional whimper from Caleb in the back seat. The road wound through miles of black water and cypress trees that rose from the swamp like dark fingers reaching toward the sky. I'd always liked the isolation out here. Tonight it felt less like solitude and more like protection. The iron gates opened automatically as we approached, the headlights glinting off the H-crest embedded in their center. When the car pulled up before the house, Lena's eyes widened. The 2-story plantation-style home stood glowing in the storm, white columns and wide porches shining against the dark. She held Caleb tighter, uncertain whether to be comforted or frightened. Come inside, I said, opening her door. He needs warmth. Inside, the foyer lights cast a golden glow on marble floors. A faint scent of cedar and old books hung in the air. I had kept the house pristine out of habit, though no one but the staff had lived here for years. I led them to a sitting room near the fireplace. Mitchell followed with his medical bag, setting it on the table as flames crackled to life. Keep him hydrated tonight, he said to Lena. He'll sleep better in the heat. I'll return in the morning. Thank you, she whispered. When the doctor left, I poured 2 cups of coffee from the sideboard and handed one to her. She accepted it hesitantly, eyes flicking from me to the portrait above the mantel, Eleanor, painted long ago, smiling faintly, as if she could see right through time. "That's your wife," Lena said. "Yes," I replied. "She died in a fire here. The house burned almost to the ground before we rebuilt it." Her brow furrowed. "I'm sorry. That must have been—" "It was," I said simply. "And now a boy with my son's eyes sleeps under my roof again. Maybe that's not coincidence." She set the cup down, voice shaking slightly. "I still don't know why you're helping us. You don't owe me anything." "Maybe I don't," I said. "But I owe him everything." She didn't answer. The flames threw dancing light across her face, tired, wary, but soft around the edges now. She reached down to adjust the blanket around Caleb. His breathing had evened out. A faint flush had replaced the fever's pallor. "You'll stay here as long as you need," I told her. "The guest suite is ready. Clothes, food, whatever you require. No questions asked." Lena blinked, disbelief flickering in her eyes. "Just like that?" "Just like that," I said. "You and I can talk tomorrow." I showed her to the East Wing myself, past long hallways lined with photographs, flights I'd piloted, company awards, a few family pictures from before everything fell apart. She stopped at one. A young man beside a small twin-engine plane, sunlight flashing off his hair. "Aaron," she whispered. "Yes," I said. "Taken the year before he left." "He looks so happy," she murmured. "He was. That was before ambition drowned him." She looked at me, something unreadable in her gaze, pity, maybe, or anger on his behalf. Then she followed me the rest of the way in silence. The guest suite overlooked the river. I turned on a small lamp beside the bed and showed her the adjoining bathroom, stocked with towels and soap. "Everything here is yours tonight," I said. "There's a phone by the bed if you need anything." When I turned to go, her voice stopped me. "Mr. Hayes, what if this is a mistake? What if he's not your grandson?" I paused at the doorway. "Then you'll still have a roof over your heads," I said. "But if he is, then the two of you just changed everything I thought I knew about family." Back in my study, I poured myself a small glass of whiskey. The firelight shimmered on the surface like molten amber. I'd promised myself I'd never drink in this room again. It reminded me too much of the night Eleanor died. But tonight wasn't about old vows. Tonight was about truth, clawing its way back from the ashes. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, where a metal box had sat untouched for 20 years. The key was still taped under the drawer. Inside lay files, scorched at the edges, company records. The investigators had returned after the fire. Among them was one marked Internal Audit 1995. I'd looked through it 100 times over the years, trying to understand how Aaron had disappeared without a trace. But as I lifted the papers now, something new caught my eye. A folder stamped Confidential Property Transfer. It hadn't been there before. The paper smelled faintly of smoke. My pulse quickened. I unfolded the first page and froze. The signature line bore my name, but the handwriting wasn't mine. Someone had forged my authorization for a transfer of company assets to an offshore account in the Caymans. And the witness signature beside it, clear as day, was Charles Hayes, my brother. The realization came like a slow, cold wave. Charles had framed Aaron for the theft. And when Eleanor discovered the truth, the fire. My fingers tightened on the edge of the file until it crumpled. A soft sound came from behind me, tiny footsteps. I turned to see Lena standing in the doorway, Caleb asleep on her shoulder. "He had a nightmare," she said. "I was walking him back to bed and saw your light." I quickly closed the folder. "He's safe now," I said. She hesitated, looking at me, then at the photo of Eleanor on the wall. "You remind me of her," I said quietly. "The way you hold him. She used to do that with Aaron when he was sick." Lena smiled faintly. Then maybe he inherited something good after all. I wanted to tell her what I'd just discovered, but I couldn't, not yet. The truth was too raw, too dangerous. Instead, I said, "Go back to bed, Lena. Tomorrow, we'll start figuring out what comes next." When she left, I opened the folder again, tracing the forged signature with my thumb. Outside, The storm had finally broken. The river reflected the moon in trembling silver lines. Somewhere beyond those calm waters, my brother was sleeping soundly in his mansion, unaware that the past he'd buried was about to surface. I whispered to the empty room, "You burned everything, Charles, but the ashes still remember." I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Eleanor's face the night before the fire, her soft smile when she said she had something important to show me in the morning. But morning never came. The flames did. Now I understood why. At sunrise, the rain had stopped, leaving a heavy mist over the river. I made coffee, black and bitter, and stared out the window at the water sliding past like liquid glass. In my mind, one name kept circling like a vulture: Charles. My younger brother. The man I'd trusted to rebuild our company when I was too broken to face the world. By mid-morning, I had made up my mind. I picked up the phone and called his private number. It rang twice before he answered, voice slick and cheerful as ever. "Walter, haven't heard from you in years. Thought you'd given up on the living." "I need to talk to you," I said evenly. "In person." A pause. "This about Aaron again? Because I told you back then. It's about you." He laughed softly. "Oh, come now. Don't get dramatic. What do you want?" 10 minutes of honesty. "You wouldn't know what to do with it." "Then I'll record it," I said, and ended the call before he could reply. An hour later I was on the highway to Memphis, driving my black Bentley through stretches of pine and marshland. The morning air was clean, but my stomach twisted with every mile. In the passenger seat sat a small digital recorder I hadn't used since my boardroom days. When I reached his mansion, a house far grander than mine, his assistant tried to stop me at the door. I brushed past her and entered his study. It was like stepping into a mirror of my own. Oak shelves, a grand desk, and behind it the same Hayes family crest that once hung in my office before the fire. Charles looked up from a decanter of bourbon, smiling like a man greeting an old friend. "Well, well, the ghost of Riverbend himself. Coffee or confession?" "I want the truth," I said. He chuckled, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "You always were sentimental. The truth about what?" "About Aaron. About Eleanor. About the fire." For a split second, his eyes flickered just enough to confirm what I already knew. Then he smiled again, wolfish and smooth. "Still chasing ghosts, brother? Aaron was a thief. Eleanor was a saint. And the fire was an accident. There's your truth." I reached into my coat and placed the old folder on his desk. The forged documents. The Cayman accounts. His name. The color drained from his face. "You were sloppy," I said. "You forged my signature, funneled the money, and pinned it on Aaron. When Eleanor found out, you burned the office to hide it. She was supposed to die there, wasn't she?" He slammed his glass down, the sound sharp as gunfire. "Watch yourself, Walter." "No," I said, leaning forward. "You watch me, because this time I have proof." He sneered. "Proof? You have paper. I have power. You think anyone will take the word of an old man locked away with his ghosts?" "Maybe not," I said quietly, "but they'll take your voice." His brows knit. That was when he noticed the small red light blinking on my jacket pocket. "You son of a p—" He lunged across the desk, but I was faster. I grabbed the recorder and stepped back. "You just confessed to everything, Charles." His breathing quickened, his composure cracking. "You don't understand what you're starting. That boy, that woman, they're part of it too. You're digging up things that should have stayed buried." "Like Aaron?" He laughed. A sharp, bitter sound. "Aaron's been dead for years. You want someone to blame for that too? Fine. Blame me. But you'll regret it. Everyone does." I turned for the door. "You're right about one thing. I do blame you." His voice followed me, low and venomous. "You think you can protect them, old man? You couldn't protect your wife? You won't protect them either." Outside, the sunlight stabbed through the mist. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the recorder as I got into the car. By the time I reached Riverbend, it was afternoon. The house was quiet, too quiet. I called out for Lena, but there was no answer. A cold panic spread through me as I hurried down the hall to the guest suite. The door was open. The bed was unmade. Caleb's toys lay scattered on the floor. "Lena?" I shouted. Nothing. Then I saw it. A scrap of paper pinned to the doorframe. Ink smudged from damp fingers. "Don't look for us. It's safer this way. L." But beneath her rushed handwriting was another message. Smaller. Written in red marker. "Stop digging, or lose the boy." The paper trembled in my grip. My throat went dry. I checked the security footage from the gate. At 2:37 p.m., a dark SUV had pulled up. The driver was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a baseball cap pulled low. Charles had men like that. I replayed the footage twice, each time feeling the same dread crawl higher into my chest. They'd taken them. The phone rang just then. I snatched it up. It was Sheriff Langford, an old friend from my pilot days. "Walter, I just got a call from a motel clerk near Natchez. Said a woman and a kid matching your description checked in this morning, but 2 men came looking for them soon after. She left in a hurry." "She's running," I whispered. "Or being chased," Langford said. Outside, the clouds were thickening again. The air smelled like rain and gasoline. I pocketed the recorder and the note. "Then I'm not sitting here waiting for another fire." "What are you going to do?" he asked. I stepped onto the porch and looked toward the distant line of the highway, where thunder rolled over the delta like an omen. "I'm going to end this," I said, "once and for all." The Mississippi Delta has its own kind of silence, the kind that hums like an engine about to stall. By the time I reached the highway, storm clouds had swallowed the sky again, thick and gray as wet wool. The road stretched ahead in a straight black line that seemed to disappear into nothing. Sheriff Langford's voice echoed in my head as I drove. Or being chased. Every few miles, I checked the rearview mirror. No sign of anyone following, but I knew better than to feel safe. Charles had always surrounded himself with men who handled the dirt he didn't want traced to his name. If he wanted Lena and Caleb silenced, they were already running out of time. The wipers beat a nervous rhythm against the windshield. I gripped the wheel tighter. The recorder sat in the cup holder, the small red light still blinking, proof of a confession powerful enough to bring Charles down. But it wouldn't matter if he destroyed them before I reached him. By the time I reached Jackson again, dusk had fallen. Streetlights flickered to life in the rain. I stopped at a gas station to call Langford. "They were spotted heading south on Highway 61, he said. "Old SUV, dark green, belongs to Hayes Development Group's security division. We traced a corporate card used at a motel in Natchez about an hour ago." "Then they're headed for the state line," I said. "Toward Louisiana, maybe Baton Rouge. There's a private airfield across the border your brothers used before." "Then that's where I'll find them." "Walter," Langford said slowly, "you're 74, not 17. Don't do something I'll regret writing in my report." I hung up before I could change my mind. The storm intensified. As I crossed the bridge over the Yazoo River, lightning split the sky, illuminating the cypress groves like pale skeletons. I pushed the car faster, the tires hissing against the slick pavement. 2 hours later, I saw it, the SUV, parked crooked on the shoulder, near a sign that read, "Bayou des Chênes, Wildlife Reserve, closed after dark." Its taillights glowed faint red through the curtain of rain. I killed my headlights and pulled over behind a cluster of trees. From where I sat, I could just make out 2 men outside the vehicle, talking near the edge of the road. One smoked a cigarette, the ember flaring orange against the night. Another stood by the back door, glancing inside every few seconds. Through the rain, I caught a glimpse of movement, a woman's silhouette in the back seat. Lena. My pulse hammered in my ears. I grabbed the recorder and slipped it into my jacket. The revolver I hadn't touched in years rested heavy against my hip. I stepped out into the rain. The mud sucked at my shoes as I crept closer, using the trees for cover. The men's voices carried over the wind. "Boss said, wait till he calls," one muttered. The other exhaled smoke. "You think the old man's dumb enough to come here himself?" I stepped out of the shadows. Dumber men have tried. Both turned at once. "Hey, who the hell?" I raised the revolver. "Move away from the car." The smoker smirked. "You don't have it in you, Grandpa. You'd be surprised what grief can teach a man, I said. The other reached for his side, but before he could draw, a familiar voice shouted from the trees behind them, "Drop it, both of you!" Langford emerged, soaked to the bone, his badge flashing in the lightning. 2 deputies followed, guns drawn. The 2 men froze, then raised their hands slowly. Langford gave me a sharp look. "You really don't listen, do you?" "Not when family's involved," I said. He moved to the car and yanked open the back door. Lena stumbled out, clutching Caleb tight against her chest. The boy's eyes fluttered open, confused and frightened. "Walter?" she breathed. "I'm here," I said, lowering the gun. "You're safe now." One of the deputies pulled the driver from the SUV. I recognized him immediately, Charles's head of security, a man named Preston Ward. Langford's voice hardened. "Where's Charles?" Preston smirked through the rain. "You think he'd get his hands dirty? He's at the hunting lodge near the border. He's waiting for the package." Langford's eyes met mine. "You get back in your car and go home. I'll handle this." "No," I said. "This ends tonight." He hesitated, then sighed. "Fine. But you stay behind me." The drive to the lodge was short, but felt like an eternity. The rain turned the dirt road into a river of mud. The headlights cut through sheets of silver water as we pulled up to the old wooden structure. A faint light glowed from inside. Langford signaled to his deputies to circle the building. He motioned for me to stay back, but I shook my head and followed him to the porch. The door creaked open before we even knocked. Charles stood there, perfectly composed, a glass of brandy in one hand, the other resting casually on a pistol, holstered at his hip. "Brother," he said smoothly, "I was wondering when you'd show up." "Where are your men?" Langford demanded. "Outside," Charles said, "waiting for orders, but it seems you've already met them." I stepped forward. "You took a child, Charles." "I was retrieving what's mine," he said, sipping his drink. "The company, the name. You've always been too weak to protect it." "Protect it?" I hissed. "You burned it to the ground." His smile faltered for the first time. Langford moved closer. "You're under arrest for kidnapping, arson, and fraud." Charles chuckled. "You think you can prove any of that?" I lifted the recorder from my pocket, the red light blinking like a heartbeat. "I already did." The change in his face was instant. The calm cracked, replaced by something dark and desperate. He drew the gun. Langford shouted, "Drop it." But Charles turned the barrel toward me. "You should have stayed out of it, Walter." Before he could fire, Langford tackled him. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the small room. Splinters flew from the doorframe beside my head. They wrestled for control, but Charles was younger, stronger. He shoved Langford off and raised the weapon again. I didn't think, I just acted. I swung the heavy recorder at his wrist. The gun clattered to the floor. One of the deputies rushed in, kicking it away and pinning Charles to the ground. Langford caught his breath, straightening his hat. "You all right?" "Better than him," I said, watching as they cuffed my brother. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, backup arriving. Too late for the fight, but just in time to see the end. As they led Charles out into the rain, he twisted his head to glare at me. "You'll lose everything again," he spat. "You always do." I met his eyes, calm now. "Not this time." Lena appeared on the porch behind me, holding Caleb close. The boy blinked sleepily, unafraid. Langford looked at them, then at me. "You did good, Walter." I shook my head. "No, I just finally stopped running from the fire." Thunder rolled over the delta, low and steady. The night had burned itself out, leaving only rain and the smell of wet earth. I turned to Lena and Caleb, guiding them toward the car. "Let's go home," I said. "We've got a story to finish." The courthouse in Vicksburg smelled like polished oak and dusted history, the kind of place where time moved slower, and justice always came with a price. 2 months had passed since the night at the hunting lodge. Charles had been charged with arson, fraud, and attempted murder. The evidence, his forged signatures, financial records, and the recording was airtight. Still, part of me couldn't shake the old ache. He was my brother, the last living tie to my bloodline after Aaron's death. The courtroom was packed the morning the trial began. Journalists lined the benches, their pens poised like vultures, waiting for the first drop of blood. Lena sat behind me, Caleb in her lap, his small hand gripping her necklace. I caught her eye and nodded just enough to let her know we were almost there. Charles entered flanked by 2 deputies, wearing a tailored suit that didn't hide the hollowness in his face. He looked thinner, meaner, his arrogance distilled into something sharp and poisonous. When our eyes met, his lips twitched into a smirk, as if this were still a game. The prosecutor, a sharp young woman named Dana Corbett, stood to open the proceedings. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice steady, "this case is about greed, about a man who stole from his own family, destroyed lives to cover his tracks, and nearly killed to keep his secret buried." I listened, hands folded tightly in my lap, every word dragging me back through 30 years of ashes. When they played the recording, the courtroom went silent. My brother's voice filled the room, cool and venomous. "You think anyone will take the word of an old man locked away with his ghosts?" "Maybe not," I had said, "but they'll take your voice." The jury didn't move. The judge's expression hardened. When the audio ended, Dana stepped back, letting the silence do its work. Charles' lawyer rose next, a slick corporate attorney who tried to spin the confession as a manipulated conversation taken out of context. But the context was sitting in the front row, breathing. The second day of testimony belonged to me. As I took the stand, every camera lens in the room seemed to aim straight for my chest. My palms were cold despite the heat of the lights. "Mr. Hayes," Dana began, "can you tell the court in your own words what happened the night your wife died?" The words came slowly, each one heavy. "There was a fire in our main office. My wife, Eleanor, had gone there late to meet with my brother. I didn't know until morning. They told me it was an accident, but I found her wedding ring fused to the lockbox. Inside were documents with Charles's signature and mine, forged." Dana nodded. "And you believe your brother caused that fire?" "I don't believe it," I said, my voice steady. "I know it." Across the room, Charles leaned back, smiling faintly, the same smile he wore when we were boys sneaking whiskey from our father's cabinet. He hadn't changed. When the defense questioned me, they tried to break me down. They asked about my age, my memory, my health. "Mr. Hayes," the lawyer said, "isn't it true you've suffered from stress-related episodes in recent years?" "Only when I'm forced to sit this close to a liar," I said evenly, and the courtroom murmured before the judge called for order. After 4 days of testimony, the trial closed with Dana's final words. "You can't choose your family, but you can choose what legacy you leave behind. Mr. Hayes chose truth. The defendant chose destruction." The jury returned in less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Charles didn't flinch. He just stared at me as the bailiff led him away, his expression unreadable until the very last moment, when he whispered something I couldn't hear. I should have felt relief, but all I felt was exhaustion, a deep, marrow-level weariness. Justice had come, yes, but it had taken everything with it. Outside, the reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed like lightning. Lena shielded Caleb from the noise, as I answered only one question. "What will you do now, Mr. Hayes?" I looked past them toward the river shimmering beyond the courthouse steps. "I'm going home," I said simply. But home wasn't what it used to be. 3 days later, I sat in my lawyer's office with a folder of my own. The title on the cover read, "Last Will and Testament of Walter Hayes. My name, my legacy." For decades I'd let my wealth sit idle, a fortress built from regret. But now I knew what I wanted it to stand for. "Everything goes to the Riverbend Foundation," I told the attorney. "Affordable housing projects, scholarships for families displaced by fraud, and a permanent fund for children without guardians." He raised an eyebrow. "And your estate?" "Riverbend will become a sanctuary," I said. "A place for those who've lost their homes like Lena once did, and the Hayes family name dies with me." He nodded slowly, understanding. "And the girl?" I smiled faintly. "Caleb's not my blood, but he's part of my legacy now. I'll leave a trust in his name. When he's old enough, he can decide what home means to him." That night, Lena found me on the porch overlooking the river. The sunset bled orange into the water. She sat beside me quietly for a while before speaking. "You didn't have to do all this for us," she said. "I didn't," I replied. "I did it for the man I failed to protect." She looked at me, eyes glistening. "Aaron." I nodded. "And maybe for the part of me that still believes in redemption." We sat there as the first fireflies blinked to life over the riverbank. Inside the house, Caleb's laughter echoed faintly, chasing away the ghosts that had lived there too long. In that moment, I realized something Eleanor used to say was finally true. You can't rebuild the past, but you can build something that outlasts it. Tomorrow, I would file the documents. But tonight, for the first time in 30 years, I allowed myself to rest. 1 year later, the Delta was alive again. The air smelled of magnolia and rain-soaked earth. The river rolled past my porch, wide and calm, carrying sunlight like liquid gold. It had been 12 months since Charles's sentencing. 12 months since I'd stood in that courthouse and finally buried the ghosts that had ruled my life for 3 decades. The Riverbend estate had changed too. The old mansion no longer felt like a mausoleum of memories. The walls were painted a warm cream, sunlight streaming through open windows that used to stay shut. Children's laughter sometimes echoed down the halls, now the sound of volunteers working, of lives beginning again. The Riverbend Foundation had become everything Eleanor dreamed of. Families displaced by floods and fires came here to rebuild. Some stayed only weeks. Others found permanent work helping maintain the estate. Lena ran the operations with quiet grace, her practical intelligence keeping everything moving smoothly. Caleb, now 3, had claimed my porch as his playground, a small wooden airplane forever clutched in his hand. That morning, he ran across the veranda in bare feet, shouting, "Grandpa Walt, look, the fish are back." I smiled, setting down my coffee and watching him lean over the railing to point toward the water, where silver ripples shimmered. "Easy there, Captain," I said, pretending to grab his shirt as he leaned too far. "Those fish don't want company." He giggled, the sound pure, like something the river itself had blessed. Lena stepped out from the doorway, wiping her hands on a towel. "He's been up since 6, she said with a mock sigh. "Apparently fish watch the sunrise now." "Smart fish," I said. "They probably know something we don't." She smiled, leaning on the railing beside me. Her eyes had lost the haunted look from that first night under the bridge. There was light there now, strength. She glanced at Caleb, chasing dragonflies near the garden. "You know," she said softly, "he calls this place home now." "He's right to," I said. "Riverbend was always meant to belong to people who understand what home means." She turned to me, her expression shifting. "I still think about that day sometimes. The bridge, the rain. If you hadn't stopped, I would have found you eventually," I said gently. "The truth has a way of surfacing like the river after a storm." Silence settled comfortably between us, the kind of silence that no longer felt heavy with guilt or loss, but full of something new, peace. Later that afternoon, we gathered by the new community garden for the foundation's dedication ceremony. Reporters and local officials stood under white tents, while families planted small trees in neat rows. One of them, a young single mother named Denise, approached me with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice trembling, "before this place, my daughter and I were living in our car. You gave us more than a roof, you gave us hope." I took her hand, humbled. "Ma'am, you gave yourself hope. We just built the walls to hold it." Lena whispered, "You sound just like Eleanor." I looked at her and smiled. Maybe I finally understand what she meant all those years. When the speeches ended, we unveiled a bronze plaque mounted near the fountain. The inscription read, "The Riverbend Foundation. In memory of Eleanor and Aaron Hayes, for every family that has lost its home, may this place remind you that love rebuilds stronger than fire." Applause broke out as the wind carried the scent of rain again, soft and cool. I closed my eyes for a moment, hearing not the clatter of cameras or voices, but Eleanor's laughter somewhere in the back of my memory. That night, after the guests had gone, I sat on the porch again, the sky painted in gold and violet. The cicadas hummed, the river whispered, and the stars began to blink awake. Lena brought out a glass of iced tea and joined me quietly. "You ever think she'd be proud of you?" she asked. "I think she'd be proud of you," I said. "And of that little boy who reminds me what tomorrow looks like." She smiled faintly. "He told me he wants to be a pilot, you know. Says you're going to teach him to fly." I chuckled. Then I'd better stick around long enough to keep that promise. Caleb wandered out, rubbing his eyes, his small airplane still in hand. He climbed into my lap and rested his head on my shoulder. "Grandpa, are there really angels in the sky?" I looked up at the first evening star. "There are," I said softly. "Some just fly without wings." He smiled sleepily. "Like you and Grandma Eleanor?" I nodded, feeling something loosen in my chest that had been tight for 30 years. Exactly like that. After he fell asleep, I carried him inside, past the walls where new photographs hung, families smiling, children playing, volunteers planting gardens. The past had finally made room for the present. When I stepped back onto the porch, the river glimmered under moonlight, endless and forgiving. I thought of Aaron, of the life he'd lost, and of the grandson he'd never meet. But perhaps that's what redemption really is, not undoing the past, but ensuring it doesn't repeat. For decades, I believed the fire had taken everything from me, my wife, my son, my peace. But the truth was simpler. It had only stripped away what wasn't meant to last. What remained, the will to love, to rebuild, to forgive, was what made me human again. I raised my glass toward the river, to the woman who taught me grace, to the son I failed but never stopped loving, and to the family that found me under a bridge when I thought my heart had turned to stone. "To the river," I murmured, "and the second chances it brings." As the night deepened, fireflies drifted across the water like fallen stars. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed through the valley, long and low, fading into peace. For the first time in my long, stubborn life, I understood what home really meant. It wasn't the house I'd built. It was the people I'd finally let in. No matter how deep betrayal cuts, love and truth can still rebuild what was lost. Family isn't bound by blood, but by the courage to care when no one else will. Like the river that carves its path through rock and fire alike, the human heart finds a way, if we let it.